Hey guys, it's Joe here at the Joe Madden Sports Cast. Joined this afternoon by Mike Blewitt Sports, wagering and fantasy host at Sports Grid TV. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here talking with you about a little bit of everything, I guess, today.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. We will jump into the NBA, but before we do that, Mike, I want to know how you got started in this industry.
Sure. So I'm sort of a late arrival to broadcasting in general. I have had a long sports career, though. I've been in sports business for over 20 years. I've worked for sports marketing firms. I've worked on the technology side for sports. And I always had this passion for broadcasting and writing. And I started getting into that over 10 years ago, probably about 12 years ago now. So I started writing in the fantasy and wagering space, and that started some momentum going. I was on Sirius XM, and then I linked up after I was on Sirius XM. I linked up really sort of simultaneously with Sports Grid. It was previously an iteration called Fantasy Sports Network, and before that, Roto Experts. But I've been with them really for the long haul. I've seen people come and go, but I've been here a mainstay on Sports Grid and have hosted shows on all different topics. I'm probably known more for NFL than anything else, but I've certainly hosted college basketball, pro basketball, MLB shows that ran the full gamut. So it was really the writing that started into podcasts, which turned into kind of traditional radio broadcasts and now live streaming shows like this.
Absolutely. Well, you're crushing it in the industry. You're also, Sports Grid is doing phenomenal. I'm just honored to have you on as a guest here today with everything that you have going on. Now, I want to know where the passion for sports came from, Mike.
Sure. So I would love to say I know exactly when it started, but I can tell you that it started when I was really little. I had a passion for playing sports, and I do remember even at a very young age, I would make lineups of opposing teams that the Yankees were playing, and I would go out into the backyard, and I would effectively do the play-by-play of the game as I was throwing the ball off a pitchback or off my stoop. For those of you that lived in a city growing up, I had a stoop in front of my attached house that I would throw the ball off of, and if the ball went into the street, I'd have to say car and go run out and get it. But I would make the lineups for the Orioles and the Blue Jays as they were playing the Yankees and effectively call the game. So I can tell from a really early age, it was something that I wanted to do. I got into the business side first before the broadcasting, sort of backed my way into the broadcasting. But I always aspired to be more of a broadcaster than an athlete. Maybe it was because I knew I wasn't good enough, but it was more because those are really the people I looked up to for whatever reason, more than even the athletes. So Al Michaels and Bob Costas and Marv Albert were the people I looked up to, maybe even more so than Dave Winfield and Don Mattingly, to continue the Yankees theme.
That's a really cool story. So when you're standing out on that stoop throwing the ball, were you calling out plays then, or what were you doing?
I would say that I was probably calling the play that happened. So I'd throw it off the stoop and it went over my head. It was a home run. If it was a line out back to the pitcher, I would call those games. And I don't know that I was doing it vociferously. I don't know that I was doing that out loud, but I was definitely running through it in my head. A base hit by Mickey Rivers or something along those lines. I would call that out to myself, and I was keeping score of the game and I was going through the innings. So on a hot day, I probably wore myself out doing 9-inning games.
I'm sure you slept well of a nighttime after you were out doing that for sure.
Now, my parents and grandparents thought I was nuts, but they left me alone. So I just did it. And I wasn't even an only child. I had tons of friends. I had a sister that I could play with. But if I could find an hour to myself, I was going to do that.
That is a really awesome story. Now, who in the family had the love of baseball that got you involved in that?
Probably me more than anybody else, but we grew up as a family. I grew up in Queens, New York, really not far from Shea Stadium at all, which is now Citi Field, only about 3 or 4 miles from there. But as happenstance would have it, I was a Yankees fan. My mother and I were both, and my sister were all born in the Bronx. I moved to Queens. Well, I really grew up in Queens, but always had grandparents that lived in the Bronx, so I would often be there several days a week. And Yankee Stadium, even though I was in the shadow of Citi Field, it's only about 9 miles away, not even. Maybe it's not, about a 9 to 10 minute drive, no traffic, to Yankee Stadium from where I grew up. So yeah, Shea Stadium 4 miles, Yankee Stadium 9 miles. I mean, people would accuse me of being a turncoat because I was a Yankees fan living in Queens, and I always say it's only 15 minutes from us.
Yeah. It's
not
in your
far away at all.
backyard.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that is an awesome story. I think it's incredible. It's one part I love about my show is hearing these stories, Mike. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about what you have going on at Sports Grid before we move to the NBA.
Sure, absolutely. So currently hosting NFL and college football shows during the off season. So it's called Football Full Circle. We generally go through an hour of the NFL futures and the off season, and we do the same for college. College is starting to warm up a little bit now. College has a little bit more of a dead period than the NFL does. But as college games start to come out, we're starting to see more and more lines, more and more creative futures. So we're talking a lot of football futures right now, but I also fill in on other shows during the week whenever I can. And we talk about any and all topics. I'll move to really, I guess I would call myself the game day NFL host. So I host sort of the pregame shows for the NFL, and I hosted the NFL draft out in Vegas. So for whatever that is long-term, it's my sweet spot right now.
How was the draft out in Vegas, Mike?
Really an incredible atmosphere. When you start into this industry, you don't necessarily know where it's going to take you. You do a lot of shows like this from your home studio. We happen to have a studio in Manhattan and New Jersey as well, and I've had opportunities there. But I guess if I was playing it forward at the beginning of my career, I would not necessarily have anticipated that I'd be live on a sportsbook floor in MGM Grand calling out the NFL draft and updating people on odds and players picked and everything else. So really rewarding experience. Tiring, obviously, doing a live show from a sportsbook floor. You're pushing your voice a lot. And during a live draft show, there's a lot of information being pushed out. So when you're done with it, it's a lot of fun and it's rewarding, but it does feel like you took a week worth of final exams when all is said and done. And as much as people are like, well, did you party out in Vegas? I said, absolutely not. I went up to my room, I passed out, and then I got on a flight out of there.
Yeah, you would have crashed so hard. Just the overstimulation of all the energy in the room too.
Yeah, there were thousands of people walking behind our set and in front of our set the whole day. It was not in a studio. There was just a couple of cones around us, sort of partitions around us, but anybody could wave to the camera, jump up and down behind us. They were shouting our names, and we had headsets on, so you can't hear everything that they're saying, but it starts to become distracting if you're not looking at the camera and see all these people moving by. But really a lot of fun, and MGM and BetMGM Sportsbook were amazing hosts.
Yeah, absolutely incredible experience. Good for you for not squirreling at every moment. I don't know how I would get through that. I would lose my train of thought very easily in that situation, but good for you, Mike.
And Barry Sanders was on with us, so that was kind of fun. You don't get a chance to meet somebody like that very often. So Barry came through, and he was great. He was he's what we've learned the type of person he is. He's a really nice, down to earth man who was this unbelievably incredible football player, but he's just a very humble guy and thankful, and from a huge family in Stillwater, Oklahoma. He went on to become the biggest running back ever.
Yeah, there's some just incredible athletes that make such an impact even after they're off the field as well. So he's one of them.
Yeah, no doubt. He's the best I've ever seen from an ability standpoint. And I can tell you one-on-one, he's a very nice guy and was thankful to us. And I was like, you kind of made the show for us tonight, buddy. So I appreciate that you're thankful, but it's really our pleasure. So.
Oh, what a pleasure to meet him. Let's turn to the NBA, Mike. We have game 3 tonight. This is going to be definitely a good game. We have the series tied 1 apiece. We're in Boston. The Celtics are favored by 3.5 points. What are you liking in this one?
So it's been a really funky series, right? You and I were talking about it even before we started recording. We've had just wild second halves a totally unpredictable fourth quarter in game one, a 40-16 matchup. And then game two, the Warriors come out in their typical third quarter push. They start turning the ball over a lot, and then that becomes a blowout. At some point, I think we'd all like to see a closer game. This is having the feel of the Celtics Heat series where we're going blowouts back and forth. But I would say that all of this downtime, I think, probably favors the Celtics. They're probably the team that's a little bit more banged up. And coming into Boston, which can be a really tough place to play, I think gives them a little bit of an edge. Now, they're 3.5-point favorites tonight, so we're back to the drawing board in terms of trying to figure out exactly how big the edge is. I do like them tonight. Do I like them enough to lay the 3.5? Can Klay Thompson get back on track? I think these are the questions that we'll try to see answered tonight. And if Klay doesn't get going in game three, that's a significant portion of the series where they're not getting really any contributions from their second best scorer. So for now, I think I'm leaning towards the Celtics, but I think finally we'll get a closer game with the Celtics defense maybe coming through a little bit in the fourth quarter, a little bit of home ground advantage. This is a team that's played more finals games at home than really anybody, and their crowd has come through over the years. We'll see if they can do it again tonight.
Yeah, I'm hoping not for another blowout again. Like you said, we've seen so many during the playoffs. We saw the blowout in the last game. If the Golden State Warriors get the win tonight, do you think the Boston Celtics are done? Do you think the Golden State Warriors just keep rolling?
No. Now the way that this series has set up, now there's a very big advantage to the team that wins game three. In a tied 1-1 series, you're talking 70-75% of the teams that win game three are going to go on to win the series. But because of the manner in which the Celtics won game one, I thought that did change the dynamic of the series. I thought Warriors in 6. I didn't think this was going to be a walkover, but I thought they could get it in 6. I don't know that I can see that really happening anymore. That would mean that they're really going to win the next 3 of the next 4. I don't know that necessarily happens. I just get the feeling this one's going 7. I'm still leaning towards the Warriors, but if the Celtics win this one tonight, I think it's a big advantage for them, obviously, because they're going to have more home games and they will have effectively stolen home court advantage. They already have, but they'll effectively have stolen it back again in a more significant way. So I think the winner of tonight's game has a big advantage, but I won't call it over because I think without the Warriors getting their full complement of points from Klay and the manner in which the Celtics have been able to play defense throughout the year, I think it still gives both teams a chance if things swing one way or the other in the subsequent games 4 through 7.
It's definitely going to be a great game. We've got a total that's fallen by half a point now at 212. If you think the Warriors are going to come out, play stronger defensively, do you think we have a lower scoring game like we saw in the second?
Yeah, I think, look, in game one, I was leaning towards the under, and clearly that didn't happen. And in game two, like you said, a little bit more low scoring. I think it's easy to forget that the Warriors, while the Celtics have really good defensive principles and a defensive-minded coach, I think it's easy to forget because of all the Splash Brothers and all of their dynamic offensive play that the Warriors have won in the past because they're good defensively as well. Mm-hmm. So I do think that tonight's game, gosh, I hate to put the officials into the mix already on this, but I think the officials are going to matter in that you have a raucous home crowd and you have to really wonder how this game is going to be called. I think they'll probably let them play a little bit, which means I think this will be a little bit of a rougher game. Maybe more guys to the line, but also perhaps less open shots, guys maybe getting hit with elbows, running through screens, and maybe shots not getting off as clean. So I think the refs letting them play a little bit ramps up the defense, and we do have a lower scoring game. These numbers have been pretty hard to figure out one way or the other, right? We got an over, then we get an under. I think we're headed towards another under tonight, but obviously it won't stun me if it goes over.
I definitely love when the officials let them play out there. There's nothing worse than watching that whistle blow 100 times in the span of 5 minutes.
Agreed. We've seen it a lot in games in the past, and it just grinds the action to a halt. That's why people get upset with modern day NBA. I don't, but it's part of the reason that people do.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today on the Joe Madden Sports Podcast. Can you let everyone know where to find you on socials as well as your shows on Sports Grid?
Yeah, absolutely. At Mike Blewitt on Twitter, at Hey Blewitt on Instagram. I'm thankful to Joe for having me on here. She does a great job. She's very supportive of the industry, and I want you to keep watching her. She's a rising star as well.
Oh, Mike, that's the sweetest thing. Thank you so very much. You have a wonderful day, and I can't wait to have you back on again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. You guys,
Thanks.
I'll be back tomorrow with another Joe Madden Sports Podcast.